What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kick-Ass Podcast. We are back here today to take a look at episode 2 of the docu-series Mr. McMahon on Netflix. Again, this is episode 2 of a 6-part series. I was debating on doing episode 2 and 3 together, but decided just to keep it separate. So today will just be on episode 2, and then I'll release episode 3 and obviously so forth. I still have to finish episode 5 and then episode 6. It's just been one of those things, like I said before in episode 1. It's not one of those that I want to just kind of like have on and then just kind of be doing other things or like cleaning or what have you. I want to take notes and be able to pay attention to it, right? This is very heavily hyped. Well, I'm not gonna say heavily hyped. That's not proper. It was very heavily anticipated, I guess I would say, in the majority of us wrestling fans. I have heard from a few people who said they're just not interested in it, period, after everything that's come out from the lawsuit and things like that, which I totally get. But again, this excuse me, this series was filmed prior to the lawsuit and the allegations and everything like that, and coming out. So everyone that was interviewed, Vince McMahon himself, obviously, all that was done prior to. They did throw some updates and some excerpts from some I think like Law and Crime Network, for instance, on YouTube, some like just like audio clips of the breaking news coming out. So they did at least acknowledge it as best as they could, but it was just kind of like really odd. And I'm sure they're kicking themselves too, right? But at the same token too, it's probably a I don't know, because nothing, whatever. To me, it may have ended up being a good thing. They did the interview and got so many hours and so much content with Vince prior to the lawsuit coming to fruition, because with the lawsuit coming out, I highly doubt that he would have sat down to do any type of interview, period, let alone what they say, like 200 hours. And I think 100 hours specifically just with him. So again, obviously everyone, right, would want to get information from him, but I highly doubt too, guys, that he would be so divulging to a Netflix series, right, regarding serious allegations. And I don't think he would use that as his tell-all, and I don't think even the basic attorney or lawyer would allow him to speak on that. So again, we got what we got with the series, and I think it was overall very well done. Yes, there were some things, and again, haven't quite finished it yet, but as from what I've seen, overall very well done. Yes, there's some things that they either have left out, not fully dug into, or kind of let Vince just speak his truth to it and just kind of keep it moving. But that's to be expected, in my opinion. And I think too, they I am a little surprised, and I don't want to say impressed because that's too strong of a word, but I'll just leave it as surprise that they did bring up certain scandals, if you want to classify them as that, which to me is kind of too loose when it comes to serious things and serious allegations and serious like physicality. I'm surprised they even brought it up in that regard, and Vince's response to certain things I think is very interesting as well. So with all that being said, I'm gonna just get some, I guess, business out of the way really quick. As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the show. I truly appreciate it. I'm not gonna waste too much more time. I'm gonna get into episode 2 here, but feel free to follow the show on Twitter at @kickashpodcast_. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. You can also follow me and the guys over at Brass Ring Media at Brass Ring Media on YouTube. I do a weekly show Saturday mornings live at 10 a.m. over on that channel with them. Well, I do it solo, but I do the content is solely for Brass Ring Media, so you won't be able to see that over here. So definitely check that out, and you can join me live Saturday mornings. I won't be live next week. I was trying to go to Bad Blood, but the tickets were insane. Maybe if they drop, I'll make a last minute change. But yeah, it's just out of the cards now. Last I checked, just to give you guys an idea of the ticket prices for Bad Blood, and again, this is Atlanta, Georgia, State Farm Arena. Yes, it's going to be a really good show, but wait till you hear these prices. Nosebleed seats, the very top of the arena, right? I forget the exact section number. $350, including fees. So I think without fees, or prior to fees, it was like 280 or 290 or something to that effect. And then when you add the service fees, convenience fees, and all that bullshit, $350, almost $400 for a nosebleed seat ticket to a Bad Blood pay-per-view. That's more than I paid to go to WrestleMania this year. Like what the fuck? Like that's just now to be fair, that's not a WWE price, and I probably should have started with that. That's not a WWE listed price. That is a resale price. But so I'm not like mad at WWE. Maybe a little bit because that, they already set the ticket price high enough for them to be able to resell it at that price. But Jesus, guys, like what are we doing out here? Like yes, it's nothing new and it's nothing groundbreaking or anything like that, but it's like, what the fuck? Like you almost $400 for a nosebleed seat. Like, and it's not even like I'm kind of close. It would be like dead center, like in the middle of the road. Like it's just like I, I try to justify a lot of bullshit purchases for wrestling, and I've spent a good amount of money on tickets that more than I should have probably, but like this is where I drew the line. I was like, I just can't. And I was really bummed because I was really looking forward to making a whole trip out of it. We were gonna go up there, take the dog, stuff like that. We're still gonna travel. We're still gonna try to we're still gonna be out of because that's we still had made bookings because I was legit planning on going. I just was gonna buy the ticket. And I guess I should have bought it earlier, but like I missed the on sale date, but it is what it is. But back to the original point, all that was to say, I am not going to be at Bad Blood unless a miracle happens and ticket prices are much, much lower than the next less than a week. But I still will not be live next Saturday morning at Brass Ring Media. I still will be traveling up to Georgia. For now, unrelated things, but still kind of tied in the same weird way. But kind of stemming off of like the hurricane. I forget Helene, however they pronounced it. Me being down here in Florida, just kind of just taking care of some stuff. So with all that out of the way, thank you guys again for checking out the show. I really appreciate it. And I'll try to put a timestamp in here just so people don't have to waste 7 minutes of their life just listening to things that aren't really related to this episode at all. But episode 2 in the Mr. McMahon series starts off, and the title is Heat. So that's and it's interesting to me. It's just one of those things too. Just hearing like those industry terms just out in the public now is just kind of just wild to me still. But with that phrase and that title of the episode, to expect some stuff, right? And again, this transcription, and I referenced them for the Who Killed WCW series as well. I have my notes here, but I found this transcription as well. So shout out to 411mania.com and specifically the author Robert Leedy Jr. So shout out to you, dude. You did a really good job with the transcription here, so I appreciate it. So yeah, thank you, and I'll throw it in the notes here as well when I post the episode on YouTube. So if you guys want to read along and check that out as well, and check out his other work and the other content there also. So just a plug for them, but great work there. But again, episode 2 started off title Heat. We start with Vince singing "Stand Back" at the Slammies, which was one of those memories that I've seen the video clip a good amount of times at this point, but it's just one of those like memories that was at the back of my head that I kind of forgot about. It's just wild to see. So if you guys haven't seen that, it's Vince McMahon on stage. He's singing "Stand Back." You have to just take a couple minutes to go check it out. But then you have various wrestlers like Hulk Hogan. I think Mr. T is in there as well at some point. Just playing guitar and fake playing guitar, and it's just crazy. It's a crazy visual. So check that out. But it's kind of ironic now with just the title "Stand Back." Everyone should stand back at this point, right? But Dave Meltzer says 84 and 85 were pivotal in wrestling history as everything was changing. And leads into the birth of Saturday night's main event. Vince partnered with NBC to do several shows a year to fill in where Saturday Night Live was on a break. Vince notes it was a really big deal, and it was huge. And the author here notes that people in his age group were watching it at that time, so shout out to them. But yeah, and Saturday, and we discussed this in episode 1 as well. I'm pretty certain. Saturday night's main event was a big deal for them. Or no, I think that was in reference to the MTV, but getting on cable television was huge, right? And remaining and getting on certain networks and things like that was a big platform for them. Um, and really propelled the wrestling industry, and it really set a value and it set a foundation for, okay, this is what we've been doing and garnering for obviously at this point decades now, but this is what they can do, especially at that point, just getting off the ground, right? And building the brand awareness is was very key. And Saturday night's main event played a huge part in that. We had an infiltration of other celebrities as well, which we definitely discussed on episode one. I don't know why I'm questioning myself, but it had to be episode one because I don't know where else I would have talked about it. But like with Cyndi Lauper as well. So she obviously was on MTV more so with the music aspect, but it, the impact and just the cultural impact, especially being that Saturday night's main event had as a whole, was huge for them, and that's why it's really cool to see Saturday night's main event coming back. They'll be pretty certain it's December 14th on Long Island, so really cool. I know people up there very close to me, so it'd be really cool to go up there. But I don't know, like the whole thing with Atlanta. Who knows what these ticket prices are going to be? So TBD on that. Um, but continuing on here, with business booming, more shows were needed, and wrestlers were working 7 nights a week. Jimmy Hart notes it was a hard grind, and Bret Hart to me was the MVP in this series. Or if not the MVP, one of the MVPs. He was just great. He just keeps it real, man. And Bret wanted just a few more days off a year. Meltzer says they could have managed that and managed the schedule better, especially in the late '80s when it was a disaster traveling at that point. And Ric Flair has even mentioned in Hulk Hogan wrestling twice on Sundays, and that's not just an exaggeration. That was a reality for them. He continues that the schedule now isn't that bad, and the wrestlers are on guaranteed contracts. They don't have the pressure to work hurt, whereas in the '80s they had to work to make money, which is where painkillers really were not introduced, but maybe in some cases introduced, but really amplified and really depended on, and that's your livelihood, like it sucks because especially being an independent contractor too, you don't have built-in health insurance where your employer is chipping in or anything like that. Everything is independent. Everything is based on yourself. So I can imagine what they were going through financially, physically, emotionally, right? And that's why fast to the early 2000s, where so many more wrestlers were dying young, and things were happening. That's where a lot of the I don't want to say bad publicity because that kind of has like a weird connotation to it, but that's where a lot of I guess heat, if you want to put it that way, was coming from, and the pressure on Vince and WWE to take a look at what's going on and to do what they need to do to help the wrestlers and to take care of them as best. Well, I don't want to say as best as they could because they still could be doing better, but implementing the wellness program and making sure there's checks and balances and things like that. So, and by doing that, who knows how many lives they've changed and saved, So I think it's it sucks that so many wrestlers had to go through that, and to really kind of pave the way to get to the wellness policy and the changes that the industry itself has made as a whole. But and I think in sports in general too, sports in general, my dog's not here, sorry, have made changes. And for instance, like concussions, they take that so much more seriously now, which we'll get into later on. Stone Cold, of course, I'm sure you guys at this point have seen the clip, if not watched the episode already, with Stone Cold talking about concussions and CT and things like that. So we'll talk about that at a later point. But yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that so many bad things had to happen, but sometimes, the only thing you can do is take a positive out of a bad situation. And I think that's what sports in general have begun to do and are doing. So I think that's all we can hope for, right? Is just to continue to acknowledge what we do know and to continue to learn in a lot of ways. But continuing on here, Bob Costas, our favorite friend, right? Him and Phil Mushnick, I think are all of our favorites. Brings up the wrestlers who were exploited and they had no union. Brett says they needed a union, and that's what Jesse Ventura was trying to do. I really wish they could have gotten Jesse. Can you imagine like Jesse Ventura's uh, opinions and his input? I think you have to imagine rather at this point, right, with all the allegations and the lawsuits coming out, that they have to do some type of part two. I'm again, there's no way. I would be shocked if they got Vince to go on there and address anything like that. But to have, and I think it'd be fair too to have everyone that they have, like your Eric Bischoff, Stephanie, Shane, Triple H, Bruce Pritchard, and all those I think I mentioned Eric Bischoff, Booker T, Tony Atlas, all those guys to go back on there and have a chance to either maybe change certain things that they said, Hulk Hogan, certain things that they said, or certain Undertaker. They keep coming to my mind now. But to have all those guys go on there and maybe just have one final, like, this is what my thoughts and my opinions of him were prior, but now that all this information has come out and we've learned X, Y, and Z, yes, it's still pending, but if they just whatever they want to say, or if they don't want to change anything at all, they could still just double down and say he's a great guy, and whatever. But I think they got to have some type of follow up, and they probably are already discussing that or in the works. And they're probably going to do that when they get more information, and because the lawsuit is on pause right now with Janelle Grant pending the federal investigation, which, whew. But yeah, so I think that it would just be nice, as weird as that sounds, to give everyone an opportunity to go back out there and at least extend the invitation to come back on there and say, hey, whatever, whether they want to double down on their original opinion or maybe say this is, yes, all the praise I still have for the business side, but now that I've learned this, maybe X, Y, and Z has changed. But whatever, whatever, each individual has their own opinion and their own personal relationship, right? So that's for them to explain or not explain if they want. But I just hope we get some type of follow-up is the long-winded portion of what I was trying to say here. But Hulk Hogan says Jesse Ventura was trying to start a union before WrestleMania 2 and admits that he was Team Vince and told him, Vince, that Jesse was stirring shit up. Brett says Hogan ratted him out, and Tony Atlas and Dave Meltzer jumped on that train as well. Vince says the whole thing was a sham and nobody in the locker room would ever get behind Jesse. Atlas says that Vince met with every wrestler and told them they would be fired if they went with Jesse. Meltzer admits most of the wrestlers would never do it and maybe some would walk out, but most would go back and undercut what Jesse was trying to do to get a better spot from Vince. That's why even today they have no union. Someone is willing to take the spot of someone that wants it more or better. Dave says it is even less likely to happen now. And I'm still kind of 50-50 on that. And to be honest with you, I don't know too much about unions, so I would need to myself do a little bit more research before I would say I would think they're, give more of an opinion one way or another in regards to whether it's more or less likely to happen nowadays. But God, I have something in my eyes. Oh my God, guys, sorry. But I think that, first of all, I think this is really interesting that Hulk Hogan finally admitted this, because I'm pretty certain this was one of the things that he had always denied, that he had never I'm pretty certain, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain this was one of those things that he was denying going back to Vince to say, and like just period, ever going back to Vince and mentioning anything about it. And everyone had always said that Hulk Hogan went and like pretty much ratted Jesse out to Vince. And Hulk Hogan admits that here. So I was actually kind of surprised by that. And again, I may be misremembering that, but I think I'm right about that. So yeah, it's just unfortunate, and it's really interesting too. Like, if Hulk wasn't a snitch and didn't run back to Vince about it, who knows what could have happened, and if a union would have ever ended up actually forming, or again, it could have just been one of those things that people agree about and like, yeah, let's do it. But when you actually go to implement it and actually go to like take action, people are maybe too scared, or just like, and not even scared. And to be fair, what Meltzer was saying was right, or whoever mentioned it. It is a dangerous situation because your livelihood is in jeopardy if Vince were to find out that you were involved in that and you were trying to stir the pot and rock the boat type thing. He's not going to book you, and he's going to make you look like shit. So it's a really tough situation, especially back then. So I get why wrestlers wouldn't be more on board to just be like, yeah, fuck this, let's join up and do X, Y, and Z, because it's not even probably, it's easier said than done for certain. And I don't even know, like I said, I want to kind of make it a point to do more research on that and get a better idea of the full extent of unions. I know like an overview of it, but just what it would fully. But moving back to the order of the episode here, we focused back on WrestleMania 2. Vince's idea was obviously to top WrestleMania 1 and to have 3 shows in 3 cities in one day. Hulk Hogan said it was a disaster because Vince couldn't be in all three places at once, obviously. And just physically, like, he couldn't be in all three places within that day. Like, I'm pretty certain he wasn't able to do that. And especially back then, with technology not where it is now, like even a fraction of it, right? Um, and Vince told Hogan that they were never going to do that again, which is no surprise there. It didn't hit as big as WrestleMania 1 did, right? And I props for trying something new. It's maybe a cool idea, and a cool thought, but just logistically, it was probably a legit disaster. WrestleMania 3, and of course, one of the biggest debates and one of the longest legends here is the debate on the actual number of attendance, which to me is just so dumb. I mean, I get it because it's a big deal, right? In a lot of ways, it's something that you hang your hat on, and you want to be the measuring stick for all the other events and things like that. So I get it, but to me, I don't even know why it's so hard and it's such a debate on what the actual number is. Period. This is the amount of tickets that were sold. It should be just point blank. Like, I don't understand why that's so hard to track or really determine. Now, whether those, let's say you sell 100,000 tickets and only 80,000 people actually show up, that's one thing. But to me, it's nowadays it's different because there's ticket scalpers, right? That I was just bitching about earlier. But I don't think as much so as back in the day, people were buying tickets to something that they weren't going to go to. So I don't know. To me, this is just kind of bonkers that it was always that big of a deal. But Vince knew there was a massive stadium in Michigan and knew of a match that could fill it, which was Hogan and Andre. He admits they had wrestled before, but their plan was to convince the new audience that it had never happened, uh, which is the fun part about wrestling, right? Especially back then. Um, Vince's new task was convincing Andre to return to the business because he was off filming The Princess Bride. Andre, and he was in very bad shape physically at that point. He was in a lot of pain. His back was in really bad shape. Andre had just done the movie and didn't want to return to wrestling at that point, but Vince went over there to meet Andre while he was filming the movie and pitched the idea of having the back surgery and then returning to face Hogan in front of 93,000 people. Andre laughed at first, and Vince told him the plan was to make Andre the heel, as the world had never seen him like that. Andre finally agreed and got the operation, and the rest is history, as they say. Next, they showed Piper's Pit. Andre saying, "I am here for one reason, to challenge you for the World Championship match at WrestleMania." Piper, I'm sorry, Hogan. Hogan, "I'm here for one reason, to challenge you for the World Championship match at WrestleMania." Piper says, Are you or are you going to fight him at WrestleMania 3? Yes or no? Hogan says yes. And the rest again is history in that regard. Um, so yeah, Vince says we sold 93,000 seats. And again, it's whatever. We see footage of Aretha Franklin singing American the Beautiful? I think it was. Um, and she's such a beautiful voice, man. Shout out to Aretha. Such a great voice. Okay, here we go. Lost train of thought for a second. Vince says Hogan and Andre were the ones that he knew that could draw the house. He continues the story of how Andre would never let Hogan know who was going to win the match, and Hogan referenced that as well. And that's crazy if that's true. I was kind of like 50-50 on, because with what Hogan says, but apparently that's true. Hogan didn't know if he was actually going to win. But Vince continued. Okay. And Hogan went to Vince, and Vince assured him that things would be fine. Andre would do the right thing. Don't worry. And Hogan was like, "What does that mean?" Which, again, I'd be pretty stressed if I was Hogan too. So I get it. Hogan was amazed at the size of the crowd and figured this would either be the easiest thing he would ever do or it would be a disaster. He realized how bad Andre's back was, so he tried to keep him near the ropes so he could use that to brace himself and to get him back up and make it a little bit easier on him. At one point towards the end, obviously, Andre had yelled "slam," and it shocked Hogan. He said he didn't know he was winning until Andre didn't kick out. So Hogan's reaction there was legit. He said this is what the author said, that he always put over Andre Huge for what he did for him that night, and that is true. Hogan, and if you go down to his story in Clearwater, he's always loved Andre and always has merch over there too, for Hogan. Or for Andre rather. So he's always done right by Andre, I believe, in my opinion. Unless I've missed something. But Vince said that it was the probably the greatest attraction that they ever had, and I don't think that's much of a debate there. I guess obviously now you can new statistics, but Hogan and Andre, that was just it. Meltzer says the story was Andre rather, passing the torch to Hogan, but Hogan was already a bigger star than Andre heading into the match at that point. Which, yeah, whatever. That's true. But again, it's just to solidify it type thing. And then Meltzer finally debunks all of the lies, which was on that it was Andre's first loss, Andre the Giants. Andre being slammed for the first time, and in the attendance number, he says they have said 93,000 so many times that they probably believe it by now. Hogan doesn't just say 93,000, but he says the actual total amount was 93,173. Pritchard and Vince both mentioned 93,000, but Meltzer says it was actually 78,000 in the building. But whatever. Hogan says Mania 3 changed the business and launched him into superstar status. No doubt there. Tony Atlas, says Hogan may have been the most popular person in the world at one point. And is love him or hate him, personally, right? And agree with whatever. You can't deny that. Stephanie says at one point as a kid, she felt resentment that her dad never got the credit for creating all of Hulkamania, which I think is kind of funny because he didn't. He just amplified it. But Tony Atlas says that every word out of Hogan's mouth was what Vince wanted him to say. Hogan says the same because everything Vince came up with turned to gold. Which, again, the character of Hulkamania, the pretty much like the outline of it was already done, but Vince was like the mouthpiece for it. So yeah, that's why he deserves credit for it as well, in my opinion. I skipped a little bit too far. All right, so continuing on, Hogan would be out doing the shows, drawing the money while Vince was in the office working around the clock to keep things moving. Hogan told Vince that he wanted to do movies, but Vince was worried that he would lose Hogan to Hollywood, which I get the worry there. Vince pitched the idea of making their own movie for Hogan to try, and Vince admits that he knew nothing about making a movie, but they wanted to write one together. There have been many rumors they went to a cabin in the woods. Okay. Not gonna. Yeah, that was just the editor's note there. Hogan says they spent 2.5 days in a hotel room and didn't know what they were doing, but had fun. And here comes No Holds Bar. Bruce Pritchard says it wasn't the worst movie, but it wasn't great. And then they reference the Dookie line, which you have to take a look at. It's something else. Bruce Pritchard is asked when he felt Hogan had started to fade and mentions around WrestleMania 6. Hogan was still the biggest star that they had, and his reaction was bigger than Warrior's. Vince says Hogan's star had been fading a little bit, so they wanted to put Hogan on the bench for a while, which, yeah, questionable, because it was fading, but they just needed to shake it up. Like, they just need to make a change, in my opinion. But I get too, and I'm not even against them wanting to make new stars, so it's kind of like, whatever, like, have this in one hand, the other in the other. Hogan says Warrior was built better than him and had brighter colors, which I was actually kind of surprised about that he admitted that. So whatever. But Hogan does say the problem with Warrior was that he didn't have the love for the business as Hogan did. But he did for Warrior what Andre did for him, and that was passing the torch. Which, okay, the match was a really good match, though, in my opinion. So you guys should check it out at WrestleMania 6. But Warrior wasn't pretty much cutting it, and they had to pivot back to Hulk. That leads and brings us to Sergeant Slaughter. Their idea was to turn Sergeant Slaughter heel and make him an Iraqi sympathizer. For Vince, it was a way to capitalize on what was happening in the world and get heat. There it is. Yeah. He says the story was working really well, and the real world ruined things as Iraq invaded Kuwait. Americans were fighting overseas now, and people didn't want to see it being turned into a wrestling story. Hogan says Slaughter and his family were getting death threats, and he felt the whole thing was a risky move. Vince says they backed off the story a little bit, but still had the match. Yeah. Vince said, at the end of the day, the American won. Yeah. Just something else, right? Pritchard says the audience was sick of Hogan in that role as the American hero, and again, in my opinion, they just need to freshen him up. And not necessarily, I don't know, I'm not going to get into that. I guess it's a whole nother discussion right now. There were also whispers about a doctor prescribing steroids to wrestlers. That was Dr. George Zahorian, and Vince says that he was appointed by the PA State Athletic Commission to cover WWF at the time shows. They had no voice in who was appointed. He was in the locker room with the boys and started selling steroids to them, which was not illegal at the time as long as you have a prescription for it. Hogan says it became part of the norm as as everyone in sports in Hollywood were talking, or I'm sorry, we're taking them to become larger than life. So yeah, and then they just show some clips of various big other celebrities. It's just funny. They just I don't know. Bret Hart says the doctor would check everyone before the match and then ask what they needed. Vince says it was not illegal to sell steroids, says he bought some. Excuse me, but it was illegal to prescribe them and then sell them. So there we go. Bruce Pritchard mentions they were legal and it became illegal if not for the intended purpose as a class 3 substance when Reagan started his crackdown on drugs, and they showed some clips on that. So Horia was arrested and it came at a bad time as Vince had started the WBF, which was the World Bodybuilding Federation. Vince says it was not a good time at all as all bodybuilders did were take steroids, so he decided to fold the WBF. He was getting all kinds of heat, there's that word again, and felt like he was getting hit from all sides. So Horan testified that he treated Hogan for a serious steroid abuse problem. Vince was pressured into steroid testing, and he went on the air saying that WWF would be drug-free. He admitted to taking steroids at one time and promised WWF would be the standard for drug-free and drug testing, which there's a little press conference type looking thing he did for it. Him at a podium type thing, rather. He said, or that same day, rather, Hogan appeared on the Arsenio Hall show. Vince told Hogan to come clean, but Hogan denied and said he only took steroids 3 times. And Hogan says that he regrets lying at that point, or on that show, he really does. And then everyone came out to shoot down Hogan's claims, and you had Billy Graham and David Schultz telling the news that they each shot Hogan up personally with steroids. Hogan admits to self-destructing himself and said that he should have listened to Vince. Vince says you need to tell the truth and take what comes with it. I'll leave that one there. Okay. Phil Mushnick, our second favorite, a columnist for the New York Post. And I'm not going to get into him right now. Maybe I will. I respect the fact what you're doing and that you want to bring awareness to all sides of the business, and I agree as well. If some shady shit is going on, it needs to have a light shine on it, 100%. But you don't need to be a dick, man. You don't need to be an asshole, and you don't need to just shit on a product just because you don't like it. Long story short on it. Bruce Pritchard said he wants to be nice, but says there's nothing nice to say about him. Vince says Phil was digging for everything he could and has a vendetta to him, or has a vendetta to this day against him in wrestling. And they show Phil, which again, good for them for bringing him on though. That was a nice little scoop there. Phil says I don't know why because he's a dirtbag. Meltzer says Phil is the one guy that wrote strongly against Vince, stronger than what I would write. Phil says when he started writing his stories, he received letters that he didn't know the half of it. He returned calls, and it was mind-blowing that what he was hearing. David Shoemaker says pulling back the curtain on pro wrestling would be shocking to people, which, again, Dark Side of the Ring has made a living of doing that, what the author says here in facts. Tony Atlas says they will come off as some of the worst human beings of the earth. He admits they abused the hell out of women, and they were toys to them. Say that again. Tony Atlas says and admits that they abused the hell out of women as they were just toys to them. And yet a lot of people question what some women and even other men say, which is just mind-blowing to me. But moving on, they show a clip of Jimmy Snuka, which I think was a nice transition. Takes us back to 1983, where something happened in a hotel in Allentown between Snuka and his girlfriend. She hit her head and died, and the person who investigated it felt it was homicide, but no charges were filed, and people think to this day Vince had a hand in getting Snuka out of trouble. Dark Side of the Ring did an episode of that, and then Robert Laney here did a review of that, which you can check out at 401mania.com. Yeah. Phil was the first one to bring out the darker side of wrestling, and he broke the ring boy scandal. Mel Phillips would bring underage ring boys to the show, and they would be sexually harassed. Brett says Mel Phillips was a total pedophile who wouldn't hire ring crew unless they would do sexual favors. Phil learned it involved Terry Gavin, the executive in Connecticut, and Pat Patterson. Pritchard says the business was homophobic and Pat was openly gay, but became a top guy everywhere he went. News footage of Tom Cole saying Pat Patterson would pat him on the butt and grab his testicles. I don't know what words I can and can't say on here. Gavin said, which is so dumb. Garvin offered him cocaine and propositioned him as well. He refused to have sex and was let go from the company at 16. Phil says at best Vince was guilty of rank neglect, which I'm not sure what rank neglect is. Vince says Phil didn't care who he hurt on either side. Phil says these were real kids being abused on Vince's watch. And again, if that's 100% true, it needs to be taken care of. No question. Brett thinks something may have happened, but doesn't know how you can prove it. Vince settled and Mel Phillips and Garvin were let go. Meltzer says Patterson had resigned, but he had a conversation with Vince and he told Dave that one of the three was innocent. That was Pat and that was Pat, the one that was innocent that he was referring to. And Dave asked why he had resigned then. Vince said the business was all about gay witch hunts, so Pat had to leave. Dave notes most people in wrestling who were around Pat believe Pat never acted unprofessionally. Pritchard notes and says that he doesn't believe the allegations against Pat, but the others, no comment. Then we have a clip we transition to Tony Atlas. And Atlas says they all knew Pat was doing this stuff and alleges that Pat would grab his area. The producer asked why they never complained. They being to Atlas, and Tony Atlas said to who? He is the booker and number 2 in the company. The producer shoots back Vince. Atlas nearly chokes laughing, says he needed Pat more than he needed me. So implying that Atlas would be let go if he implied anything against Pat, which it's not shocking to me, and I would believe that, That happens everywhere, sadly enough. It's just our world, man. Dave says that Pat was Vince's right-hand man in the company and calls him a savant, rather. Atlas doesn't think that Vince protected Pat, but was protecting the business as a whole, rather. The reaction was legitimate media. The reaction from legitimate media was dismissive, and the only ones that jumped on the scandals were shows like Donahue. Vince says he is one of the few guys who enjoys confrontation and went on the show and stood up for himself. He doesn't know if it was a good or bad decision, but he did it. We also get footage from where Dave was sitting on the panel right next to Vince, which is crazy to see, and he had a mullet and everything. Pritchard notes that Vince was getting frustrated as this was something he couldn't control. That had to be the biggest thing for Vince, as he's a control freak, something that he can't control. Jimmy Hart is then asked about the various backstage relationships, but he wants to be cautious because he doesn't know what they can talk about and what can be really put in the open. Which is why I fucking love Brett, because he gives no fucks and brings up Rita Marie, who was the first female referee. Vince says he was accused of alleged rape, and that never happened. Rita goes on Geraldo and details what Vince did to her, and it sounds like what we have heard about the current situation going on are very similar. She said that she had to satisfy Vince to keep her $1 million contract. Vince claims it was consensual, so he's admitting something happened there, right? And says once you are accused of rape, you are the R word, and says and this is the part that I was like, what the fuck did you just say? He says if it was rape, the statute of limitations had run out. I'm sorry, what? If I had a consensual relationship with someone, that wouldn't be probably one of the first 100 thoughts of mine. So it's very interesting because, again, this was before any of the allegations that came in the lawsuit that came against him now. So it shows you already what his mindset was in at that time. This was 21, right? 2021, I think. So I don't know. Disgusting, right? Vince sued her and Dorado, and the public turned on her and viewed her as a gold digger. Phil says the public didn't want to know, and the major papers ran away from it as it was just wrestling. But Phil wouldn't let it go. More trouble as the federal government comes for Vince about the steroids, and Vince blames Phil for shining light on it. Phil says he was an FBI informant, as they would read what he wrote in the paper and act on it. Which, well, it's kind of funny that play on, but whatever. The indictments came and were only on the steroid trials and didn't look into the Ring Boy or Rita scandals. Vince entered a plea of not guilty. Dark Side of the Ring covered that as well. Vince says the federal government can be the biggest bullies as they have unlimited resources. They make people cop a plea, but Vince said, fuck yourself. And he wasn't guilty of anything. Which, whatever, it's just kind of funny. Vince gets neck surgery before the trial, so he has to wear that neck brace. Dave doesn't think it was a need of surgery at that time, but Vince wanted sympathy. Vince, which I'm glad that they asked him about this and it was brought up, because just whatever. But Vince says that was not the case. And Dave Shoemaker rather brings up how heels would wear neck braces to get the crowd to boo them, and then they showed a clip of, oh my god, Bobby the Brain Heenan at the panel, so that was kind of funny. Hogan brings up that the fans started to turn on him and he didn't feel like he was in control of the crowds anymore. He told Vince that it was time for him to go, and that's why Hogan had his last match at WrestleMania 8. Brett says people didn't understand how dire the situation was, and it was a perfect time for competition to pounce. Ted Turner was one of the pioneers of cable television and was one to first broadcast pro wrestling nationwide. Eric Bischoff says they were number 2 in wrestling behind WWF, but they may as well have been number 202 because that's how wide the gap was. Eric says before he was hired, WCW was doing a cheap version of what WWF was doing. Eric was following the steroids trial and was aware of that Hogan had left WWF at the time, and that he was doing some filming in Orlando, and that they just so happened to be doing the Disney or the filming for their show at the Disney Studios as well. So it was kind of like a happy coincidence. Hogan recalls saying and telling Vince that he would never run against him, and Vince gave him his release as he believed Hogan, but then he popped up in WCW. Vince said it broke his heart. Shane said McMahon said it was a slap in the face, and he views it as such even to this day. Pritchard says Hogan was offered a better deal, and there was also the trial hanging over WWF, which people left questioning if Vince or the WWF would even be there. The government wanted Hogan to be their star witness, and he was told if he didn't go along with, if he didn't go along, they would turn their attention to him, and he was looking at 17 years. He being Hogan. Meltzer kind of backs this up and says he being Hogan, didn't want to testify against Vince, but the government made him. They had something on Hogan, but they wanted Vince more. The conviction rate for the cases were very high, so that's, it's a shady situation. Vince says he believes in the law of the jungle, and Hogan finishes the episode by noting that he was granted immunity and he knew what he was going to say. In 1994, and then here's the excerpts here. In 1994, Vince McMahon withdrew his defamation lawsuit against Rita Chatterton and Geraldo Rivera. In 2023, during a temporary lift of statute of limitations for alleged victims of sexual offense in New York State, McMahon paid $1 million settlement to Rita Chatterton. So good for her. And then the last one here, McMahon continues to deny any wrongdoing. So with that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap the episode up here. I'm going to have a little bit more comments. I do have to jump because I have to get over to my part-time here this evening. So I'm going to have a little bit more thoughts as a whole leading into episode 3 as well. But I think they could have dug into certain things here a little bit better on episode 2. But I want to kind of delve into that a little bit more on episode 3. So thank you guys as always for checking out the show. I truly appreciate it. Feel free to follow me, like I said, on Twitter at @KickAshPodcast_. You can follow me personally at ASHMANNS. And yeah, until next time, guys, thank you so much for checking out the show. I truly appreciate it. And just stay safe out there and enjoy some wrestling.